Prime Minister Carney announced more than $1 billion in support for the industry today, but he also faced questions about comments he made about U.S. tariffs yesterday, saying there was little evidence of deals without tariffs.
We are in the midst of long now and tough negotiations with the United States. We will continue to work constructively for a deal, but it has to be a deal that works for Canadians and Canadian workers. And part of the reason why we don't have a deal is that deal is not yet on the table.
Elbows out. Elbows up.
Mélanie Joly is the Minister of Industry, and she joins me now. Minister, it's good to see you. Thank you for taking time in a busy day.
It's a pleasure, David. Thank you.
Before we get into the details of the steel announcement today, I'm hoping you can give us a little bit of clarification on something the Prime Minister has said. He said yesterday there's little evidence of any country, any jurisdiction having a trade agreement with the United States without tariffs. And a lot of people are perceiving that as the Prime Minister saying Canada could accept a deal or could sign a deal with some level of tariffs. How should they view that statement?
So, David, I knew you would be asking me that question. Of course, I'm here to talk about the steel announcement today, but my answer will always be the same when it comes to the negotiations with the U.S. We'll let the Prime Minister do his work, which is very complex negotiations, and we won't negotiate in public. And so that would be my answer on all questions related to what's going on with the U.S. on the trade negotiations.
Look, I can appreciate the complexity of it, and I'm not asking this as a gotcha. I'm truly trying to understand, is this a shift in Canada's understanding of the direction of these talks, or is he merely stating fact when he says that nobody to this point has been able to avoid tariffs? I mean, how should we parse it? Or do you want to stick with the won't negotiate in public here?
Well, I think it is a fact indeed that there's been a couple of trade deals with tariffs along with the UK, or it was just announced with Indonesia. That's just how the Americans have been negotiating. As for our own situation, our situation is different. There is a pause also on fentanyl related. So the fentanyl executive order that was signed by the president back in February. And so these are active conversations, and they are linked to many, many different parts of our industries. And my job as the industry minister is to be able to support these sectors that are targeted by the U.S. administration. And ultimately, our job as a cabinet and, as a government is to make sure that we stand up for Canadians and that we defend Canadian interests. Okay. So I think, what is great about my new job at this point is not that new, David. It's really being able to control what we can control, and to be able to have our own destiny in our hands. And so that's why, the work we're doing, for example, on steel, and what the Prime Minister announced today was just not only about protecting our market. It is a pivotal way to make sure that our steel producers that have been for a long time working on supplying the U.S. auto sector are able to offer also products that will be able for our defense procurement, that will be supporting also our major projects. So it's an entire different way of doing business in the country for the steel sector.
Well, just on that, if you look at the breadth and the scope of everything that was on the table in the measures today, dealing with, changing tariff limits for countries with trade agreements, without trade agreements, shifting domestic procurement, the reskilling money, the strategic infrastructure, there is a lot there that essentially amounts to a pathway to restructure the industry, which you can look at it in one of two ways, that this is a sign of support for a core industry, or a sign that the situation with the United States is not going to get better anytime soon. So these measures become necessary. How should we view it?
I think we should view it as the fact that we've been over-dependent on the U.S. for a long, long time, which made us very strong as a country, but we can't even be stronger by relying on our own domestic reality and needs. But I must say, we will continue to do business with the U.S. That's the case every second of this day and every day of the year. But we will also work with new partners, or partners that we have not developed commercial relationship as deep as the US one, including, of course, with Europe and key Asian countries. But, when you think about it, the defense investments we're making are historical, okay? It's the biggest investment since the Second World War. It creates opportunities to have a real defense industrial strategy, which I'm working with, of course, working with the Minister of Defense and key colleagues. But now, while we will be investing in ourselves and investing in our strong men and women, protecting us and protecting our sovereignty and making the world a better place, we need to create jobs. And we need to make sure that every part of the supply chain, including the steel industry, including the aluminum industry, is able to support the defense sector and support our manufacturing sector. So to the fantastic workers in Hamilton, in Sault Ste. Marie, across the country that are working the steel sector, we have your back. And more than that, we will make sure that your career is a great one, because we'll make sure that there are jobs at these steel plants for a long time.
But, as you look to partner with countries other than the United States to reduce the dependency, you talk about key countries in Asia, for example, South Korea, Vietnam, countries that are seen as bad actors by the Steel Association for dumping steel at lower prices into the Canadian market. They're targeted by measures today to reduce their imports to about 50%. There are a lot of Canadian producers, though, who have relied on that cheaper Asian-made steel. There's going to be a knock-on effect in their sectors, isn't there, where prices will go up as they are asked to pivot towards a domestic supply?
So I know there's a concern regarding the price of steel, and that is why we want to make sure that we have very good conversations with transport companies, including freight companies and railways, because we need to make sure that the price of steel makes sense across the country. I saw today the fact that Seaspan, a major shipyard on the Pacific side, has entered into an MOU with Algoma Steel of Sault Ste. Marie. Good news. I was at Irving Shipyard yesterday in Halifax having conversations about how can we support our Canadian steel. We just announced that in the context of a procurement, we would have clauses to make sure that we're supporting our steel sector and aluminum sector, our lumber sector. So it is indeed, we are now in a world where the lots of industries are impacted by the decision by the US government. But I must say, we are really taking the right steps to make sure that we're protecting the jobs, but also we're finding ways to create opportunities and create jobs. And that's why also last Friday, David, I was in contact, well, actually, there was an incoming visit from the European industry minister, which is basically the number 2 of the EU, to make sure that we're coordinating our answer to not only the US, but also when it comes to key sectors, including steel, to make sure that the Canadian companies have access to the EU market and vice versa. So that's why you saw in our answer today a different response for countries we have free trade agreements with and countries we don't have free trade agreements with.
Right. So how did you settle on that 50% of what they'd imported? Why that number? Is that enough? Does that cut enough cheap supply out of the supply chain to force people or incentivize people to pivot to the Canadian companies? Because it does come at a higher cost because of different labor standards and other things. Just how did you arrive at the numbers you arrived at there?
So when you're an industry minister or any government that looks at the steel industry, we know that the steel industry is a crown jewel for the manufacturing sector. It is fundamental. Steel and aluminum are key to build in a country. And so that is why many countries in the world have invested in their steel sectors and have had a lot of protectionist measures. We have had an open market for steel for a long, long time. Why? Because we knew that we could export also to the US easily. And at the same time, the business was good. Now, because we're so open, we need to be careful for any form of dumping happening at a time where the US is closing down its market. And then there can be, and we were seeing signs of potential dumping from foreign steel coming into our country. And so in that context, we needed to act. We need to make sure that indeed we will make sure at the short term close our market. That's what the Prime Minister announced. Middle term, we need to make sure that we're offering companies support to be able to get through this difficult time, because these are difficult times. And at the same time that they can pivot, because long term, what we need to do is to make sure that we're investing in the domestic production of a domestic market linked to major infrastructure projects. That's why we passed the important Bill C5, and also the defense industry and our housing strategy. So it's all linked. It makes sense, but that's why we need to make sure that we were making this important announcement regarding trade barriers today.
Right. I mean, these are protectionist measures designed to protect the industry, essentially from the loss of market access in the United States. I wonder, though, Minister, do these measures stay in place if things get resolved to the U.S. and market access returns to normal? Is this sort of the new way of doing business, or is it simply short and medium-term measures to give the industry the time it needs to restructure?
I think that, we're very pragmatic. I'm a very pragmatic person. You've asked me I've given many interviews to you over the years, and that's usually how I answer things. We will adapt to events. But I think that we are in a world where a lot of countries will organize themselves through economic blocks, and that the manufacturing sector will be seen as a key national asset that is key in times where there's more geopolitical tensions and we're living in a much more dangerous world. So we need to make sure that we are keeping our manufacturing capacity, that we're investing in defense, and ultimately that we're keeping our workers able to have a good job. So I see that, when I've said that, the Prime Minister have said that also, that the relationship with the U.S. will be different. Looking ahead, that's also part of the difference that we will see in the coming years.
So one final point on this, Minister, before we let you go. There is no retaliation against the United States here. I'm assuming that is because of the state of the negotiations. You want to give until August 1st. Am I understanding that correctly? And is there a message to President Trump in this that Canada will not be a transshipment route for cheap steel in the protectionist measures you've announced today?
When you hear my different answers throughout the interview, it was mainly all about protecting Canada's industrial capacity, keeping the jobs, making sure that we're investing in the plants across the country. I'll be going to Sault Ste. Marie, I hope, in the coming 2 weeks to meet the workers, to meet the company. I've been in contact also with the CEO of Algoma Steel and also with ArcelorMittal Dofasco. We've been mainly working on keeping the jobs and the industrial capacity here as the U.S. is taking its own decisions. And meanwhile, of course, we'll continue to negotiate, but we won't let people down, and we've said that from the get-go, and that was a key part of our electoral platform. So we're just basically moving ahead.
Industry Minister Mélanie Joly, always appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us today.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you, David.
What?